Hello, everybody, and welcome to Inside the Americas. Here's what's coming up in today's show. Donald Trump makes his second nomination to the Supreme Court. But who is Brett Kavanaugh, and why is he such a contentious choice for liberals in the United States? Stay with us to find out. Then we'll be heading to Nicaragua to follow the story of a group of priests who are attacked by masked supporters of the government, shining a light on growing civil unrest in the country. And as Florida braces itself for this year's hurricane season, we're taking a look at those families still trying to pick up the pieces after last year's devastating storms. I'm Nadia Massi, and this is Inside the Americas. Well, we start with Donald Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court. This is the face of Brett Kavanaugh, somewhat a contentious nominee from the bench, whom Republicans are likely to have an uphill battle to confirm. But who exactly is he? He's an appellate judge serving on the D.C. Circuit Court since 2006 and a former advisor to George W. Bush. Democrats worry his conservative record may mean fresh challenges to abortion laws in the United States, as Solange Mougin reports.
A choice that could shape American society for decades to come. In selecting his pick for the next justice of the Supreme Court, Donald Trump knew the stakes were high.
I've often heard that, other than matters of war and peace, this is the most important decision a president will make. It is my honor and privilege to announce that I will nominate Judge Brett Kavanaugh.
A judge with some 300 opinions on the books. Kavanaugh is an established conservative. At 53, he could serve some 3 decades on the court if he's confirmed to the lifetime seat. In replacing Justice Anthony Kennedy, who's retiring and who was often a swing vote on the 9-member body, Kavanaugh could bring a more conservative bent, especially to divisive issues like abortion rights, gun control, and health care.
A judge must interpret statutes as written, and a judge must interpret the Constitution as written, informed by history and tradition and precedent.
A Yale graduate and former clerk to Justice Kennedy, he will now have to be confirmed by the Republican-held Senate. Many Democrats have vowed to fight the nomination, with some protesting outside the high court.
Look, I am not going to kid anybody. This is a tough fight, but it is a fight that we can win.
With the upcoming midterm elections in November, many seats in the already divided 49-51 Senate are in play. Democrats and Republicans will be fighting tooth and nail in the coming weeks as they decide the future direction of the U.S.'s highest court.
Next up, does a U.S. household weed killer cause cancer? The Monsanto company is one step closer to having to answer that question in court after a judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence for a jury to hear the allegations that glyphosate weed killer was to blame for more than 400 consumers developing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Well, as pressure mounts on Monsanto, a jury in California is hearing a separate case against the company mounted by a groundskeeper who is himself dying of cancer. Dwayne Johnson says he developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma while using the weed killer extensively in his job at a school. Well, despite the increased scrutiny of the dangers of glyphosate, its use in household weed killer is still common, particularly in Argentina, where the regulation of the product for the consumer market is almost non-existent. Emerald Maxwell has the story.
Sofia Gatica is trying to prevent the fumigation of these crops with glyphosate, a herbicide that's been described by the World Health Organization as probably carcinogenic, and that Sofia holds responsible for the death of her baby daughter, born with a congenital disorder. She's stopped by police, though, before being handcuffed and led away for trespassing on private property.
I entered the property to prevent all this fumigation, all that poison from entering our homes. They can enter our homes without permission, but we have to ask their permission not to kill us.
According to local doctors, rural populations in Argentina have a cancer rate 3 times higher than in the cities. And 6% of babies born in the countryside have defects compared to 2% in other areas. After years of working in the supply of herbicides for fumigation planes, this farmer suffers from severe toxic polyneuropathy. Like many locals, he blames his condition on the spraying of these products on genetically modified crops.
This is tremendously deceptive. It's a trap that has been set for us by very powerful people that will mean there will be no one left. All the land we have will not be enough to bury so many dead.
Pressured by local residents, some village mayors have begun to deliver their own regulations to control the spraying. There is still no national legislation on the use of pesticides in Argentina, the third biggest producer of GMO crops in the world, behind the United States and Brazil.
Violence in Nicaragua has continued this week as protests against the President Daniel Ortega pick up pace there. More than 250 people have now been killed. One incident, though, drawing particular attention. A group of priests became caught up in clashes, trapped between rival demonstrators. Here's a closer look at what happened.
Leave the holy sanctuary. That was the call of Bishop Silvio Baez to masked supporters of President Daniel Ortega. The bishop was part of a delegation of Catholic priests that had arrived to see anti-government protesters who'd been trapped in the basilica south of the Nicaraguan capital since violent clashes in the streets on Sunday. The priests managed to extract the group of protesters, but Bishop Baez said on social media that he'd received punches and scratches. The Archbishop of Managua called for peace.
We ask our dear God to give us all peace so that we can build a country where we love and respect each other.
In the past months, the church has taken on the role of mediator between pro- and anti-government supporters who want President Ortega to resign, for they accuse the former leftist guerrilla of authoritarianism. For Ortega's supporters, it is the anti-government protesters that are creating the trouble. But for those who took up arms in the civil war to help bring Ortega to power, he's engaging in the very actions his movement once fought against. Alvaro Gomez lost a leg when he fought with revolutionary forces against the US-backed dictatorship during the war. Now, decades later, he's lost a son to Ortega's forces.
It is infuriating, and after we fought in the 80s to keep Daniel Ortega in power, now he sends to kill, to murder the children, the grandchildren of those who followed him into power.
Nicaraguan police have been forcefully clearing anti-government roadblocks. But church leaders said Sunday that continuing to do so would only bring more pain. The church also called last month for Ortega to hold early elections in 2019 instead of in 2021. But the president said Saturday that that is not an option.
As the law dictates, there will be a time for elections, everything in its own time.
Since the protests began in April, at least 250 people have been killed in violent clashes and some 2,000 injured.
A heat wave across Canada this week has now claimed more than 70 lives. Temperatures topped 35 degrees Celsius but felt far higher in the Montreal area due to the skyrocketing humidity there. Elderly Canadians living alone without air conditioning are most at risk from deaths related to heat stroke, and health workers now say AC units should be provided as standard in nursing homes to protect the most vulnerable. Well, that summer weather also means the beginning of the hurricane season in Florida. Last year, the US state took a particular battering with 10 hurricanes striking the Sunshine State. That's our number of the week, with authorities in Florida saying 2017 was one of the worst years on record, with hurricanes Irma and Harvey leaving over 100 people dead. And as this year's storm season approaches, some people are still struggling to pick up the pieces after last year's devastating weather.
Less than 1 year ago, this Florida Keys neighborhood was flattened by Hurricane Irma. Out of nearly 3,000 severely damaged homes, only a few families were able to rebuild.
My wife had just inherited the house, a mobile home house from her mother right here. This completely gone. The next door neighbor's gone. On this block, there are only 3 habitable houses left. All the others were blown down completely.
Rebuilding has proven too expensive for most people here. Affordable hurricane-proof housing projects are very much in demand.
People can't afford to live here, and the economy is at stake. It's the servers in the restaurants, the managers, the entire tourism economy, which drives people here.
Florida's highly populated shores are among the most vulnerable in the country. Rising sea levels, floods, and storm surges represent a growing threat to the millions of homes built along the coastline.
So the projections are that there will be increased frequency and intensity of major storms in the future due to climate change. This season, there's already a projection of 10 to 16 storms, or hurricanes, and probably 1 to 4 major storms.
Haunting predictions, which place growing pressure on those working on the ground.
We are more vulnerable now. We have people that are living in RVs and travel trailers waiting for their homes to be repaired. We still have roof damage from Irma. So as we go into the 2018 hurricane season, we take that very serious, and we will respond and react much quicker and in a much larger scale than perhaps we normally would have done.
It's been 1 year since the Trump administration announced its 2020 withdrawal from the Paris Agreement on climate change mitigation, a move that so far has raised more questions than offered solutions for the many Floridians living on the coasts.
That's it then for this edition of Inside the Americas. See you next week for all the news from north to south. Thanks for watching.